Good morning. Okay, Happy New Year. We are into 2024. We are in the middle of doing Ezekiel Part 1, where we left off just before the Thanksgiving break. And now we are ready to just today do a review. And the reason we are doing review is because, as a teacher of many years, I've come to know that most people that first week back are just not prepared. They think they will be, but they've gotten out of the swing and out of the habit. And somehow I do think a day of review will help to give everybody some energy and get their minds back into it. And then they get home and they're going, oh yeah, that's where we were, I remember now. And they can get back in and do that work. So I have a variety of things to cover, but where we are in our homework is we are in lesson 6 of your homework. It was 3 chapters, right? Let me look on here and see what, it was, so lesson 6 is 17, 18, and 19. We did lesson 16 as our last, or chapter 17, sorry. We did chapter 17, the eagle and the vine, the 2 eagles and the vine, as our last lesson. And so for next week, you are going to do the rest of that homework, which is going to be chapters 18 and 19. And that's in lesson 6. That's where you find that curriculum. I think it starts on day 3 to 5 is what you'll be working on for next week's homework. Okay, so that help you out a little bit so you kind of know where you are. I know I have to kind of even process all this. This doing part A and part B, even though it helps us to minimize how much homework we have to get done, it's a little bit complicated sometimes to remember where are we in doing our homework. So we have to kind of keep up on that. But I do think it's helpful to break these things down. I remember when I was on the break, I went ahead and did a few of the chapters ahead, just enough to keep me going on a little bit. And when I hit chapter 20, I went, oh my gosh, it's like 5 pages for one chapter. I mean, front and back, so 3 pages, front, back, and then the front of the next one. It was a long one, so just being aware of that. That's in a couple weeks. Next week, you just have 2 chapters, and they're relatively typical. Anyway, but they're always very lengthy. And it's really good not to rush through these things because you want to absorb it and take it in. Okay, so let's see. This is what we're going to do today. I am going to start with just a timeline, and we've not done timelines. Usually in historical books, I do a lot of timelines. And this one, because it's been so focused on one people at one point in time, there's no need to do a time. There's nothing really to put in a timeline, right? It's all right here. So what I want to do is I want to broaden it, and I want to talk about the historical setting in a bigger context. First of all, from the perspective of big picture, what is God doing? What is going on with Ezekiel and these people? What is that all about? How did that happen? Why are we there? For that matter, I've even had many people say to me, why Israel? How does Israel fit into the picture of all this? Why are they God's chosen people? And what does that make us in relative relationship to all of that? So we just want to, kind of shine a picture here on the bigger perspective. Hopefully, I'm going to talk a little tiny bit about the 3 covenants that have to do with what we are all about in our Christian faith walk with God. The major ones. I mean, there are other covenants as well, but those 3 major ones that have to do with what we're looking at here in Ezekiel. Okay, so we're going to go back. Now, I'm not going back to Genesis yet, although I will be talking about Genesis late at some point. But we're going to start with Abraham, because we not too long ago did the Genesis study, and we got to go through that. We're kind of familiar with it. So we're going to start with Abraham and just talk about what's going on with Abraham. We know there's an Abrahamic covenant, right? Tell me what you remember about God's promises concerning the covenant. What were the 3 things that God promised? The land. 2, people. And number 3, a seed. Very good. That was neatly done. Now, concerning the land, you can go back in and look in Genesis 15 specifically in verses 18 to 21. And God is really clear on exactly from what point to what point his land is that he is going to be giving to these people. He also talks in there about why God gave that land to Israel as a nation. Now, see, this is a very hot topic for today. It certainly is relevant to current news. Why did God do that? Does anybody remember? When we did our Abrahamic part of our homework in Genesis, who did he remove off the land to give Israel that land? The Canaanites. And it was the Pezerites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, the whatever. All the ites had to be removed off the land. Why? Why were they removed off the land? That's right. Because they were a wicked people. Each of those groups, all the Canaanites in general, but the people that were living on the land were wicked. Was God arbitrary in the decision that he made concerning that? How much notice did he give those people? And did he send to them any kind of prophets like he has been doing here for Israel?
We know that Melchizedek was one.
There you go. We absolutely know Melchizedek was there. And not only that, but Abraham and his family came in and lived upon the land. Do you think they had an impact of spreading the gospel about who God was, Yahweh? Yes. Okay, so in Genesis 15, he said to them, I'm going to send Abraham somewhere. Where was he going to send his people to first? Before he gave them that land, what was going to happen?
Well, they're going to Egypt.
Yeah, so...
He didn't tell them it was going to be the land I will show you.
Well, he said to the land I will show you, but go to Genesis 15. There you go. Your people will go into captivity. For 400 years they will be in captivity. It says in Genesis 15. And then later we see that they were in Egypt, however, a total of 430 years. What's the discrepancy there? What are those 30 years about? If God said 400 years captivity,
We're free
for
for 30.
30 of the years, what?
Until Joseph is gone and nobody remembers him.
There you go. So Joseph first went down there and brought his brothers and family. They were there as guests. They weren't in the captivity.
So that was 30 years.
Right. That was about 30 years. And then the other 400, they were under hardship as slaves in captivity. And God said, okay, I'm going to leave you there. Did he say why he wanted them to be down there for 430 years or 400 years?
He was giving all those ites time. I mean, they had to follow their thing.
Very good. Good. You get an A+, Donna. All the ites had to have time for
Amorites.
this has not been fulfilled. That's right. The iniquity of the Amorites. And it's not just the Amorites. It was all the ites, right? All those Canaanites upon the land. He said their iniquity has not been fulfilled. Now, what does that mean, fulfilled? Had not come to what? To its completion of when God says what? I've had enough. Have we seen a verse or a passage? You don't have to tell me where because I don't know either. But tell me, do you remember a passage where God says that's it? He says, make the chain, right? And he says, basically, I'm done. I'm done. Israel, I have been patient. I have been patient.
One of Ezekiel's things was to do the chain.
Yeah, make the chain. Because he was saying to him, I'm done. Basically, when I remember when we did our study on that, what I recall about it is that the commentaries said basically that is a statement that says, I'm finished. I'm done. Your punishment is now coming because I've given you all this time to repent. Now it's too late. I'm done. And he's casting them off the land. Now, it's really interesting to me because even though God says that I'm done, there may have been a sparse few in the group there who, like Jeremiah's, like Daniel's, like Ezekiel, as we see, that were people who were wanting to be faithful to God, and somebody was teaching them that, so there were a few. But there was this bigger thing going on, right, where the nation on the whole was not, and God said, okay, I cannot let this slide. Why can he not let it slide? Okay, because of who God is, right? Later in Ezekiel, we start seeing God says, I am going to act for my holy name. I know we're not there yet, but we're going to... Do we have a question?
Oh, no. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
Hi, Celeste. Making yourself known. You're the ite. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay.
Scripture for the make the chain.
Yes,
It
thank you.
Just make the chain, for the land is full of bloody crimes, and the city is full of violence.
And that is Ezekiel
7, verse 23.
7:23. Make the chain. Ezekiel 7:23. So basically, the same thing was going to happen for the land of Canaan in the presence of God. He did have plenty of prophets on the land, and we don't know all of them because the story that we have primarily is about Israel, right? That's where God's focus is. But we do know through the things that were recorded, for instance, Abraham was there. We know Melchizedek was there, and they were quite profound and significant. And we can be rest assured there were plenty of people who were giving opportunity for them to know God. Because Romans actually tells that to us. Romans chapter 1 says what about knowing God? It's evident. It's and even the heavens declare that there is a God and that we should be in worship of him. Therefore, no man is without excuse. Okay, so that kind of sets that part in place. So there's a land. Now, when it came to being a people, what does this mean that there was going to promise them a people? A land, a people, being a what? A nation. Had to have a nation. Now, how did that nation happen? Over here when they went into Egypt. They were in Egypt for 400, I'm going to go ahead and put 430 years total because we know 400 were in captivity. And that's what Genesis tells us right here, right? All right, so, but the nation, what happened then was the people, when God took them into Egypt and put them into that captivity, it was while they were in that captivity as slaves, they were no longer, although they were under the oppression of the Egyptians, trust me, we've talked about this before, when a nation captures another nation or another group of people, are they going to be harsh to them and treat them really badly on the whole? No. No. Why? They're a commodity. They're an asset. They're a product. They produce things. They work the land. And as a matter of fact, kind of what we're seeing going on right now with when you look on the news about the subject of nations that are not reproducing enough, and now we're at a point where they're less than they're going to be able to replace themselves because people are not having babies. America has been kind of on that borderline for a long time now. Now with this influx that we've had from all these other countries, we're going to increase the number, but at a cost because of the fact that most of these that are coming in will not assimilate. We know that already. We've kind of seen that. But the point is, with Israel, Abraham's seed having been taken into the Egyptian captivity for 400 years, during 400 years, because they're a commodity to that nation, what happens to them while they're in their captivity for 400 years? Lots of babies. They reproduce. And now, by the time God says, okay, now I'm going to release you and set you out, they've grown to the place where they are a sustainable nation, a massive group of people, and now God is ready to take them and put them on their land. But why did he do it that way? Why didn't he start with them on the land and just take a man, let him reproduce, and gradually do it that way? What was the point to all of this Egypt and this rather spectacular entrance, so to speak, into the land and what they did?
They needed to learn to depend only on him and stay true to him, because if they went in with all the rest of the people still there, they would fall away.
Right. And if they went in and just overtook it like a normal invasion and a conquering through a normal thing, who would get the credit? They would. So the whole thing was orchestrated by God so that God could do mighty and great deeds and wonders before the eyes of both Israel, who he was bringing out of their captivity, and before the eyes of the Canaanites and the worlds around them, to show what a mighty God they had that was with them and that they were serving. Okay? So we have Abraham, now we have Joseph. When it came to the seed, let's talk about our seed just a little bit. Who is this seed specifically? It's speaking of Jesus. Now, how do we know that? Yeah, but where's our commentary on it? Galatians 3. Let's look at 8 and 9 and then verse 16 and 17. Somebody read those for me. Because the promise of a seed specifically is speaking of the Messiah seed, the Christ that would be coming, right? Okay. Somebody read those couple of verses. Just want to make sure we get those reviewed. So look at 8 and 9, Galatians 3, 8 and 9. Who wants to read that?
And the scripture foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, preached the gospel beforehand to Abraham, saying, all the nations shall be blessed in you.
Okay, so all the nations shall be blessed in you. So right there, right off the bat, we have another part of this picture coming in, and that is that even though God has chosen Abraham and he's going to bring a seed through Abraham, it's not just for the Abrahamic bloodline. It's for the whole world. It's for all the nations, okay? It's a global thing. All right, and then go into 16 and 17 to clarify who that seed is that God was promising to Abraham.
Now the promises were spoken to Abraham and to his seed. He does not say and to seeds, as referring to many, but rather one. And to your seed, that is Christ.
Okay, and to your seed, that is Christ. So that's who he promised it. Now, how would that seed come about, though? What did Abraham have to have first? His own seed. So it's going to be a seed, meaning Jesus, right? Now I'm going to go back to blue so I don't confuse it. It's a seed who will come through Abraham. Abraham's own seed. And that specifically is in that Galatia, or in that Genesis. Now I'm going to give you the Genesis one. Genesis 15:6. But just before and after that, he goes into great detail. I don't have a son of my own. Eliezer is my servant, and he's going to inherit. What do we do? And God says, look at the sky, look at the number of the stars. And I'm going to give you that. That's the nation he's referring to. And he said, but then there's this seed. And he said, I will give you a son of your own body. And so in that, what he's doing then is we're tying two messages together with Galatians giving us interpretation. Thank you, Jesus. But even without that interpretation, the Jewish people understood that seed to be a Messiah, a Savior. Now, who does it tie it back to? Since now I'm going to bring in Genesis. Who does that go back to? That seed that's being promised to be a Savior. For Adam and Eve. And it's going to be a seed that's going to do what? Crush the head of Satan. So how far back does this plan that God is right now beginning to build through this nation that he's going to bring about through Abraham? All the way to the beginning. And P.S. and by the way, go back to Ephesians 1. How far back did that plan even begin? Before the foundation of the world. God says, in him, through him, and by him, I have a plan. And he is the one I've chosen. And through him, you will be able to come into this salvation that I am going to provide for you. And I have this in the works, in the plan, in the mind and the heart of God before I even created the world. So, wow, now you're getting a lot bigger perspective now on what we're looking at in Ezekiel, because what's going on with this nation of Ezekiel is not just about Israel. It's not just about them doing all these horrible things and not walking correctly with their God, although that is the reason God is doing it. But pull back, why is God really doing this? What is he protecting? The seed. The promises that he made by covenant. Really, the first promise to Adam and Eve, which in a way is a covenant in my thinking, because he cut covenant by shedding the first animal blood in that garden moment and made a promise to them that I will send a seed who will crush the head of Satan. So the first promise of a seed was in Genesis 3. We see it come forward to Genesis 15 with Abraham. Now he says, I will through you, I am going to not give you just a land mass, which is going to be called a nation. But I'm going to multiply your numbers like the stars so that you have a nation of peoples to live upon that land. And I'm going to promise to you that through your physical bodily seed will come the seed who is going to fulfill my word I promised back in Genesis. Whew, that's amazing, isn't it? And does that not kind of draw you into a bigger context to what's going on with Ezekiel and the writings that he's giving to us at this point? All right, so now we're at Joseph's and the 400 years of captivity. What follows Joseph then, obviously, is who? Yep, Moses. And we have Mount Sinai. What happened at Mount Sinai? 10 Commandments. There's my 10 Commandments. Okay. And Moses, he said, is another covenant. Now, this covenant's a little different, though, right? What have we seen in the book of Ezekiel so far that has said to us that God is upset with them about this, something that pertains to this covenant? What are they not keeping?
It was conditional, and they're not keeping it.
But what was it that specifically he's complaining to him about? They are not keeping what? Let's see if I can remember. I think it was chapter 7. Where's my book? Nope, it does. He doesn't use that word law, though. Right?
Covenant?
Okay, wait a second. I don't have it handy with me at the moment. Does this trigger my ordinance, statutes, and Sabbaths? You have not been, and he says this over and over and over. Go to Ezekiel 5, 6 to 8. I think this is my list. I think I found it. Yeah. Okay, so read the whole verse. Ezekiel 5, 6 to 8.
Thus says the Lord, this is Jerusalem. I have set her at the center of the nations with lands around her. But she has rebelled against my ordinances more wickedly than the nations and against my statutes more than the lands which surround her. For they have rejected my ordinances and have not walked in my statutes.
Okay. And go on now, someone else go on to 11, chapter 11, verse
6, is that good enough?
6 to 8 was,
I didn't get to 7.
well, it's probably good enough. Okay. And then go to 11, 9 to 12, and also 20. Just real quickly, look at those. Somebody read one or two of those.
And I will bring you out of the midst of the city and deliver you into the hands of strangers and execute judgments against you, so you will fall by the sword. I will judge you with the sword of Israel, so that you will know that I am the Lord.
Okay. Go to, are you in 11? 9 to 12, and then 9 to 12, because go on.
You have executed my ordinance. You have not walked according to my ordinances, but have walked according to the nations around.
There you go. You have not walked according to my ordinances. Now, here's the reason I'm kind of taking you back to understand the covenant of the law, because the covenant of the law was made up or consisted of these three major pieces: ordinance, statutes, and Sabbaths. Now, he doesn't really mention Sabbath so much in the text of Ezekiel, but he talks about the more fundamental pieces of ordinance and statutes over and over and over. And then there's more. Let me just give you the last one, and you can write it down. Chapter 18, verse 9, 17, and 21. And there he's going through, and he's giving a rendition of history of Israel. You didn't obey my ordinances and statutes. You didn't obey my ordinances and statutes. You didn't obey. And one day you will obey my ordinances and statutes. So he goes into that little rendition there. And that's not all of them. I just found those three off very easily and very quickly because I wanted to demonstrate to you the fact that this is why God is angry, because they had not been keeping ordinances and statutes at this point. Now,
What the differences between ordinances and statutes
right,
were,
well,
I remember.
in general, what I want you to understand, and that was what I was going to ask the next question is, do we have ordinances and statutes in America? Or in England, or in Germany, or in, yeah, and they fall underneath what we call what? Well, yeah, it breaks down into that subdivision, but what do we have that governs over that? What is it that everybody wants to keep taking away our Second Amendment rights for? the Constitution. So what I'm trying to do is say to you that in a way, it's not an exact comparison, but it's a likeness. This is their Constitution. God made them a constitution. It gave them laws. It gave them processes through which they could work when they felt like they had been slighted or mistreated. And they had a way to go through a governing authority to set forth their grievances. And people could go to jail or be fined or whatnot. They didn't use prisoner jails except for under manslaughter or murder, in which case generally they were put to death. But they did have laws where there had to be restitution made, which I think would be much better if we use that in our America today, make people do restitution. It would probably be much more effective. But anyway, so I'm just going to write kind of in a parentheses, Constitution, kind of like a constitution. Why? It's for the nation to live by. Why would God need them to have some kind of a constitution to live by? What does that do for a massive amount of people on the whole? What does our Constitution do and should do for us nationally? Security, gives boundaries. How about common goals? How about equal justice under the law? How about equal privileges and rights through that constitutional agreement that we're all under, that constitution? This is what we're looking at here. God gave them Israel as a nation, as a people group. He gave them ordinances, statutes, and Sabbaths, and he said by exercising these, this is going to adhere my people together. It's going to make a collective, cohesive oneness of sorts for them. And it's going to keep them in line. As a matter of fact, in the New Testament, I've forgotten the verse now, but he says, what is the purpose of the law? Is the law obsolete? Is it worthless? It's a Romans passage. And he says, no, the law is a tutor to lead you to Christ. And it was there for the unruly in another passage in Romans. It's there for the unruly. Law is there, the laws and the lawgivers are there for the unruly. So God did this for them as a people group. Now, in their covenant then, what was their covenant? It was this covenant. Who made this covenant? Who was the mediator? Mediator was God. And what kind of a covenant is this one? Unconditional. There were no works needed, right? No works, no requirements. And in the end, what did it say here about Abraham in the result of it in Genesis 15:6? How did he respond to God when God said, I'm going to promise you a land, a seed, and a nation? He believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. Therefore, what kind of a covenant is this one? Not only is it something God's going to do for him, but what did it result in when he believed God? Salvation. Believing God results in salvation. So that was Genesis 15:6. Okay, and that verse, by the way, gets repeated and quoted over and over in the New Testament, which is really cool. It was reckoned to him as righteousness. Okay, now then, let's compare it then to this one. Who's the mediator here? Was who? Who is the mediator? Who helped? No. Who is the mediator for this one? Okay, in this one, when I say there was a mediator, remember, who walked between the pieces of flesh? God did. And when God walked between the pieces of flesh, what would have come upon the hem of his garment? Blood. And in doing that, then what is the significance of blood being upon the hem of his garment? If he breaks that covenant, what? That blood is upon him, and he is required by his own righteousness, by his own holiness, to keep that. And if he were to break it, his own life could be taken. Now, in the case of God, that will never happen and has never happened and will never happen, right? But God is responsible for the blood. The bloodshed of that covenant, right? Now, this mediator was who? Who was it that acted on behalf of the people for Moses? Mediator was Moses. He's just a man, not God, a man. And when he, what did he do with the blood of that covenant when the covenant was made? Do you remember? He had hyssop branches. He dipped it into the blood, and he sprinkled it like this upon all who? All the people. Okay, blood was sprinkled upon all the people. So who's responsible? Okay, so now the blood, I'm going to put it this way. They are responsible for the blood, basically. That because the blood has been sprinkled on them, now they are accountable for this covenant. So what kind of a covenant then is it? Conditional. And in that condition, basically then it's works, right? A works-based relationship. And in this one, who did God make this covenant with? With Abraham, with a man. Amen. So it's a personal covenant, correct? He didn't make it with a group of people. He made it with Abraham. He made him promises about more people to come. But the covenant he made was with a man. Over here, who is this covenant made with? With the whole nation. So this is a national covenant, meaning it's corporate. And therefore, because it was conditional, what was the condition? Obey what? You get blessed. And if you disobey, cursed. Or disciplined, right? Judgment. So with this corporate agreement, okay, because a covenant is also an agreement. If it's a corporate agreement, it results then with corporate blessing. If they're being all right, in agreement with God, if they're obeying Him, right? They get corporate blessing. But if not, what do they get? Corporate judgment, or I'm going to put judgment because that's what we're looking at. Now, you could call it cursing as well. Certainly for those who died, right? That would definitely be considered a curse. Do you remember when you go back in your mind into Deuteronomy 28:29? What were the things of the blessings? What had God told him about the blessing that he was going to give to Abraham's seed, now a nation living on the land? And when you go on the land, if you obey me under this Mosaic covenant, what will he do for the people? Give them the land. They'll flourish. They'll be fruitful. The fruit of the womb, the fruit of the field, the fruit of the flocks, right? It was going to be a fruitful, enemies wouldn't attack them. God would protect them, all these things. Now, if they did not obey, then what was at the end, what did God say? And as a matter of fact, when he says it, he states it in a manner that says, and when you do this, this is what is going to happen. What is he going to do? They won't flourish. And they will be removed off of their land. And so that is your context concerning that covenant. That's why in Ezekiel, when he makes these statements about the Sabbaths and the ordinances, because they've not been keeping them, it's not just kind of a passing statement. He's reminding them they were under covenant by blood, and they, as a corporate nation, it's a national covenant. Therefore, there is going to be corporate judgment. That's what's happening right now with Ezekiel. corporate judgment. So in the midst, because I see this, the confusion sometimes that can come with people, because they're going, but what if they didn't do it? Well, it doesn't matter at this point. And it's kind of going to be that way in the end times. As we see God come to bring judgment on the world, there's going to be on the earth, even after the rapture of the church, as new people come into faith relationship with God through those 144,000 prophets, through the 2 prophets that God is going to have stationed in Jerusalem. As people come into faith, we call the tribulation saints, right? And there's going to be a multitude of them. But when they come into faith, they're going to have to endure the judgments that God is pouring out on the earth. Some of them will die, but they'll die to go to glory. But others who are not in faith, they will die, and they will receive their condemnation too. They will end up in that place where they will be eternally judged at the great white throne judgment eventually. So this kind of sets us up to say we're looking at 2 covenants primarily that relate to Ezekiel. The first covenant was Abraham to promise them this land and to put them on the land. But before they went into the land, God set up a statute of constitution for them to live by, to keep them in line, because God knew that they wouldn't all keep in line. And he also knew so well that he declared it, when you do break this and when I do cast you off the land, but don't worry, I will bring you back. So he makes that. Now, why does he say that? But don't worry, I'll bring you back. Why is God going to bring them back?
Well, the seed has got to come.
Yeah.
And they are supposed to be a light to the world.
Right. So, but why is God doing it? I mean, he could bring the seed anywhere in planet Earth, right? If he want, I mean, well, except that there's a gazillion prophecies that it'll be in a certain place under a certain tribe, and right. But principally, morally, why is God being faithful in this way to these people, even though they're unfaithful? Yeah, because he made a promise back here. And he made a promise all the way back in the Garden of Eden to Abraham, to Adam and Eve. And he said, I am bringing a seed who will crush the head of Satan. Abraham, I'm going to use you, and through your seed's bloodline, that Savior will come, that Messiah will come. And so there's many passages that actually say, not for your sake, but for the sake of your fathers, whom I love, I am going to be doing these things. So even if Israel, when they do get on the land and they are going to mess it up, he says, I'm going to judge you. So I'm released from not having to give these blessings to you that I'm promising you if you fail me. And they will, and they do. Why do you think God even goes through this exercise then, even on the whole? What's the point to God selecting a people, giving them so much blessing, giving them all these privileges, giving them the temple, having his presence dwell among them, knowing that they're going to fail? What is that all about?
Growing them, sanctifying them, showing them that he is God.
Okay, yes. Then you will know that I am the Lord, because even in my judgment, I'm showing you that I am the Lord, right? Any other thoughts? The bigger picture of God's character and who God is. Remember when God brought them out of Egypt, and he had to even explain to them who he is. Who shall I say, Lord, that has sent me? And he said, tell them I am. The I am meaning the all-sufficient one, the Almighty, God Almighty, Yahweh, the one who was, who is to come, as it says in Revelation. The idea that God has a fullness of character that does not violate itself. He, on the one hand, is holy and righteous, but because he's holy and righteous, concerning man who sins, what must he do? He also has to show judgment, right? But in his judgment, there is mercy, James says, right? So God shows the fullness of his picture. But I think also there's another thing about this. Just having this demonstration through history for me, what this, in a way, is sad to say, but in their tragedy, I get a comfort that says there's still always hope. God is still seeking those who will search for him and find him. he is still always available. Even in the midst of an ungodly nation, there are righteous people. We looked at one of our chapters where it says, even if Noah and Daniel and I can't remember who the other one was, but even if they were there, I could only save them and not the rest, right? So God is showing to us that in the midst of judgment, there is mercy. And in the midst of judgment, he will still not fail his word. He made a promise to bring a Savior to give salvation to the world. And the only thing required from any of us is believing him. Do you believe that God said that? Do you believe that God is and that he is a rewarder of those that seek him? And the answer is yes. And if you are one who is able to say, yes, I believe God. I believe there is a God. I believe that God is who he says he is. I believe God will do what he has said he will do. You can have many other doubts. You can have many other shortcomings. You can have emotional days, bad days. And then you're going to have days on the mountaintop when you're exalting. Your whole life is exalting God. But in the ups and the downs of that, God is the steady one. He never violates his own character or his word. And he always keeps his covenant promises. So even though through this covenant they were going to fail, God has a default back here to this covenant where he says, I am still planning this. And even without your cooperation, this is going to happen. But in this process, then, I call this discipline. God is going to discipline. This corporate judgments is a discipline that he primarily works through to try to draw people back. And those who will be drawn back, he will use. And those who won't, some of them will die. Some of them, he even allows them to stay. Remember one of the chapters, he even let them come back. And even in that, it's part of God's plan. He has a reason for it. Okay, so that gives us Moses. Now they're ready to enter the land, right?
1 hour left.
I know. We're okay. I think I'm kind of incorporating everything here, so I'm doing okay. Okay, we're going to enter the land to possess. Possess the land, right? To possess and enter land. Or enter and possess. It should have been the other way around. That's my dyslexia for you. Okay, now, once they get on the land, we do see that God puts in place another sense of constitution and of government. We see kings, right? We had, first king was who? Saul, then David, then Solomon. Okay, what does 2 Kings tell us about Solomon? 11, 6-13. What did he do in the end of all things? He did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And I know I'm writing very small, and you're going to get the bigger pictures on this later, but most of this you know. You have King Saul, you have King David, and you have King Solomon. Saul was evil, we know that, and God disposed him. He was the choice by the people, and God didn't really, he allowed it, but it wasn't really his choice. As a matter of fact, God never really wanted him to have a king to begin with. He wanted to be their king, but he allowed it for the sake of the global world that we live on, where every country seems to have its rulers, and you need that kind of a rulership. Then David comes in. He was so perfect. He was the best king ever, and God said he's a man after my own heart, and he was, right? But he also failed God in many ways, and so he wasn't a perfect man, but he apparently, according to God, was what kind of a ruler? A ruler who did right in the eyes of the Lord. And from that point on, he became the standard bearer for all the kings that followed him. Everything was almost always compared back to David. There is no king like David was. And so God uses him as sort of the standard for everyone else to try to measure up to on a human level, right? But then came his son, and his son did everything that he was told not to do concerning ordinance and statutes and Sabbaths. He broke everything. So as a consequence, what happened to this Israel, the nation? the nation began. Now that doesn't look like an N, does it? I'm going to erase that and do it again. Sorry, it's a little high for me. My arm's almost not. Okay, so the nation possessed and entered, okay, or entered and possessed. What happens then after Solomon? That's right. So in 722 BC, we have what happened? What happened with the 10 northern tribes? They had broke off, they went up to the north, and then what happened to them eventually because of their sin? Assyrian captivity. Okay, so that was the 10 northern tribes. Okay, the 10 northern tribes. See. Then we have time in history, and we're going to cover it in one of the passages that is coming up. We're going to see this, I think it's an allegory between these two sisters. And we're going to do a little bit of work on it, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. But the next major thing in history then for us begins in 605. And this is when, what happens to the southern tribes? Yeah, now we've got the Babylonian captivity. It begins, right? So Assyria was a world power. And there was a world power that had power and its thumb on the neck of Israel on the whole, the 10 tribes. It was conquered then when Babylon came onto the scene, right? What followed after the Babylonian time? Medo-Persia. Then what? Greece. And then Rome. Now, what happens with Rome? What happens in the time period of Rome? Who arrives? Now the seed arrives. I'm sorry, that was rather vague, I know. Okay, so Rome. We have Rome, and I'm going to put Jesus right here at the very beginning, because we're not doing timeline for the sake of dating. We're just saying this is the era in which Jesus arrived. This is when the seed came. The seed was born. And then we see in Daniel chapter 9, in 24 to 27 is the prophecy about this seed, that when the seed would come. And because of Daniel's writing, we have the information about Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And then from Rome, it also speaks of another time, right? Of a revived Rome in the days of its toes, right? And now we have in the days of his toes. Then will come a kingdom. What kind of a kingdom will it be when it comes? The 10 toes. At the end of the 10 toes, what happens when those 10 that part of the kingdom is dissolved? What is this kingdom called? And who will be its ruler? That's right. This is the 1,000-year millennial reign. I'm sorry if I'm not doing this well enough here. But okay, so what we have Rome is, then what we have in here is that revived Rome is what it's sometimes referred to. And if you've never heard that phrase, what is the time of the revived Rome? When those 10 kings come together, make a coalition, and they become a one-world global power that, again, puts their thumb on the neck of Israel. What do we call that? The tribulation. The 7-year covenant. This is the tribulation. And we're going to look at, that's all in Revelation. The book of Revelation on the whole. I know that's a really big cross-reference to give you, but sorry. But the better one would be to go back and read also Daniel. You can look at Revelation or you can look at Daniel, because both of those give you insight into the tribulation, not to mention a multitude of others. The millennial kingdom comes in, we see in Revelation 19, where we begin to see that millennial kingdom come on the scene, and we have this restoration. So at this point then, what happens to this promise of a land and a people that will be on their land forever? So when does that come to its fullness, its fruition? At that point, at this point in the millennium. So now God is going to put Israel on her land, right? They will be what? God's people. And he will be their God. And we see when God does this, now how does God go about doing this? Yeah, and he does it through the revelation, through the time period of tribulation. He is going to purge and refine and purify. It says, I think that's what it says in there. And then this is going to be, we're going to look at this in Zechariah chapters 12 to 14, I think it was, right? 12 to 14. Yeah, 12 to 14. Okay, so that's kind of a bigger picture, because what we're looking at is the seed that's promised back here. It's not, the seed was initially born here, but now we have the seed as what? The seed reigns. He now is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And there's more stuff beyond this millennial reign that we know about, the new heaven, the new earth. I don't have any more boardroom for. So we'll just stop right there. But this is going to give you a broader perspective then of what's going on right here in this Babylonian kingdom. So now let me go over here and broaden this for you. How much time? That clock is not working. Or
Like 55 minutes.
oh, I have an hour? Holy, I don't know if I have that much to talk about. Okay, before I do that, let me go back and say, why did God choose Abraham then? Well, number one, because man needed forgiveness of sin, right? The only way you receive forgiveness of sin is through a sinless sacrifice, blood that's pure, that's tainted by the sin. So it says God's holiness has to be appeased. That's why. Because a tainted blood, or even a substitutionary blood, like an animal who's without thought, without willfulness in the doing of it, they are led to the slaughter. But Jesus, he goes willingly, right? So because man needs forgiveness of sin, and only through a sinless sacrifice is God's holiness appeased, man could not do that for himself. That's why we needed this, right? We can't do that. Only by God's grace. I think of Ephesians 2:8-9, by grace are you saved through faith, and that not of yourself. It's a gift of God. And this had to happen because of what happened in Genesis 3 in the garden. When man rebelled, when man refused to be obedient to God's law, which was don't eat of this one tree. That's the only thing they were told they couldn't do. And they did it in order to crush the head of Satan in that regards, and give man a way back into an eternal relationship with him of salvation. He has to do it for us. So that's number one, why God did it. So he really did it back in the garden, but with the Abrahamic covenant, he establishes our first timeline where we can begin to see God working in history in regards to this. Why else? It says they were created. Why the Israelite people? So many people are very undereducated about this. They see them as a rival almost to God's affections, as if God sees them as better than everyone else or something. And that is quite contrary to what God shows us. They were created to be a means to offer salvation to the whole world. Now I'm going to give you a few verses if you want to write these down. Deuteronomy 4:7-8. Also verse 37. Someone look up Isaiah 49:6. And then someone else look up Ephesians 1:3. Well, I'm just going to give it to you. Ephesians 1:3-14. Don't look it up. Just tell me what Isaiah 49:6 says. This is specifically about Israel, why God chose them.
He says, "Is it too small a thing that you should be my servant, to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to restore the preserved ones of Israel? I will also make you a light of the nations, so that my salvation may reach to the end of the earth."
Okay, so he raised them up for two reasons. as a nation. Why does God put his affections upon this people group? First of all, he did it in a supernatural way, so no one else could get credit that this nation came about. God did it. And he did it through an old man and an old woman who were barren. And he brought forth a life. And then he placed them on a land that they could have never possessed except through the powers and the signs and the wonders that God did through them and for them. And he says, I put you there to be a light to the nations so that the whole world could have salvation. And I put you there to be my servants. And in what regard were they to be his servants? Well, by doing this. By living a godly, holy life, which is what God calls all of us into. He wants all of us to walk holy. Why? Not because our holiness saves us, but because our holiness projects to God a thankful heart. It also projects to the world the kind of God that we are serving. We're not serving a God who says to us, go sacrifice your firstborn son on an altar. Or go blow yourself up, strap a bomb on and go blow yourself up for my name's sake. He doesn't do that. He is the one who shed his blood for us. He died for us. We don't have to die for him. He says, your works are nothing. The works I did are my works, and my works are the ones that save you. And by the way, that is why he gives us a day of rest. The Sabbath rest is to recognize that God did all the work. On the seventh day, God rested from all his works. And he said, and it was very good. That was back in Genesis 2. And from that point forward, there's an established system of 6 days of work and 1 day of rest. The day of rest is to reflect on the fact that we have a God that gave us everything we need. He is our Savior. He's our Creator. He's our provider. He's our protector. All these things, and we are to reflect on that. Okay, so that was who Israel was to be, the one that was reflecting who God is. Isaiah 49:6. And before that, Deuteronomy 4:7 and 8, and also 37. And then the one to follow that up is in Ephesians chapter 1. I really think you could just read all of Ephesians 1. But in there, he goes into detail about why he picked Israel, okay, to be a witness for him. Then the other one is not because of Israel himself. He didn't pick Israel because they were so good. He literally says that he didn't pick them because they were righteous, because they're not. They're a stubborn people. Do you remember how Ezekiel opens? That you're going to speak to them, but they're not going to listen. They're stubborn people, right? So in Deuteronomy 9:5 and 6, 27 to 29, those are the two verses. And then also Deuteronomy 10:5. He explains in those few tiny excerpts that I pulled out, he says he chose them because of his love for their fathers. Again, that's why I said to you, why does God make these promises? And then here he is working with these people, but he keeps telling them, but I'm going to bring you back to the land, but I'm going to bring you back to the land, but I'm going to bring, because when they get into this Babylonian captivity, I will bring you back, I will bring you back. Why? He says in these verses, not because of them, because they were stubborn and they were rebellious. And he had to judge them in order to basically restore his good name in the eyes of the world, because he had been profaned before the nations. But he said, because of my love for your fathers. Why? Well, why did he love Abraham so much? Because Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. He went into a personal relationship with God and received his salvation. And because of that covenant promise to the one he loves, he will continue to fulfill his good word all the way through. And then he says, and his covenant faithfulness to them, because God never breaks his covenant, ever. The last one thing I want to say is that he supernaturally created them to be his servant. And the supernatural creation of this nation is also a testimony. It's a witness. And to this very day, tell me, what do you see regarding Israel and what you know about her? And how is that a testimony to the fact that God is really over all this?
Because of all their getting beat up all over the
wars, all the
and
persecution.
spread out all over the place, they never lost their national identity. They never really assimilated in. They still have their own language. They still have their Torah. And all the stuff. They still, marry within each other a lot. It's just, and then when they moved back on the land in 1948, it just picked up.
And think of what happened in 1948 and the battles they've had since then. How many times has God preserved Israel? In perspective, if you do a map, You know, you've got the Middle East. You've got here's little tiny Israel, right? That's Israel. Everything else around is the rest of the world. So, and they're the problem. And everybody hates them. They hate that little dot on the map. And so, is that not a supernatural thing right there? That the preservation of their life is supernatural. The fact that they never seem to go down, right? They don't. And Jeremiah goes on and he says, as long as the sun and the moon and the stars come and go and the sun sets and the sun rises and the seasons change, he says, I have set my love upon Israel, and I will bring every one of my good words into fulfillment for them and through them. So God has not picked them because he loves them so much, but because he loves the whole world. Is there a verse in the New Testament? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth on him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. That's the picture. So that's our big picture. That's where the bigger contextual setting of all this. Okay, so I think I settled that part of it. And I think that is helpful to just kind of say, what's going on in Ezekiel? Well, this is what's going on with Ezekiel. This is why, because of what God is doing and how he's using them as a people. Now let's go into the prophets real quickly. And let's just talk about where we see these prophets. Because we really have three major prophets, right? We said we had Assyria. And then we have Babylon. And that's basically as far as we know what follows Babylon is Medo-Persia. I'll go ahead and put that on there just because we know that's going to be the end. We know that the first prophet then was a man named Jeremiah in the time reference of what we're looking at. Okay? And I had suggested that many of you would find it interesting to go in and to read through Jeremiah. Beth, good girl, Beth read the whole thing. Who else got a chance to read or listen to Jeremiah? Did anybody do it? You did it! Yay! Two of you. Okay. And I listened to it. I didn't read. I didn't sit down and read. I don't like to do that anyway. And all of that, but if I'd sit down to read, I end up taking notes and I get on rabbit trails, and I can't make myself not do the research. So I put it on an audio and just listened to the reading of it. But tell me, what were your impressions of? Yeah. It's like, okay, were they copying each other's work or what? Yeah. Yes. And yet, the very interesting thing to me is Jeremiah was making prophecies first, right? Then who came next? When we've got Jeremiah again. Jeremiah, let's put this on here. Jeremiah began in 627 BC, and he went through 574 BC. He had 53 years of prophesying, and it began at the end of Assyria captivity, or Assyrian kingdom. So Assyria was going down. Do you remember what Daniel says in Daniel 2? God does what concerning kingdoms? He raises them up and he brings them down, right? Because he is God Most High. So what we see here is Assyria goes down, Babylon comes up, and there's all kinds of stuff. And this is what we are looking at when we're looking at some of these kings, like King Necho and Egypt, and these little tiffs that went on back and forth. The last one that we looked at with the two eagles and the vine, we saw Egypt kept being brought into that. Well, and there was more countries than just that. There was also Syria and others. And they would make these little coalitions together, and they were going to try to beat back Babylon together. And eventually they all kind of waned away because Babylon was just so powerful. By whose hand? God, who brings up and puts down these kingdoms. So Jeremiah is the prophet who is speaking at the end of the Assyrian captivity and beginning into Babylon. And he is also one, they call him the weeping prophet. He went through some horrible things. But on the whole, he was saying basically the same thing that Ezekiel is saying to them again right here. So this is not news to them. And I would say if you only read one one chapter out of Jeremiah. Go back to Jeremiah 29. And there's a very famous verse in there that we all really love. Jeremiah 29:11. What does it say there? For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans not to harm you, but to bless you, to give you hope and a future, right? It's not for your harm, but it's for your good. How often do we use that verse and we appropriate it to ourselves? Who was it written for? Israel at the time of the issue that was going on. Jeremiah says, for I know the plans I have for you. So that's Jeremiah 29:11. Read the whole chapter of it, but in there he goes into great detail about how God is going to work for them and on their behalf, but they have to repent. They have to turn back. So there was that. Then we go to Babylonian captivity era, and I'm going to put on here 605 BC. Began the last conquest. This Assyria, we had Israel, 10 northern tribes in captivity. Right? In Assyria. That began in 722 BC. Right? Okay. So Jeremiah comes on kind of towards the end. Before Jeremiah were other prophets. I mean, there was Isaiah, and there were some minor prophets in there too. I can't remember who all they were, Micah or somebody. And they're all prophesying and trying to get even the northern tribes to come back in line, but they're not. They're not listening. Who was it? Elijah and Elisha were back in this time frame. I remember because we did that when we did our Kings and Prophets study. That's been a long time ago, but it's a cobweb somewhere in there. But so they had the word of God all through their national time, even before they went on the land. Starting with Abraham as a nation, they began to be birthed. From that point forward, God always had a prophet among them, somebody speaking for him. Now, Jeremiah starts here. Then comes 605, and who comes on the scene? Daniel. He comes next. And so now he's the prophet. And who is he prophesying to? Where is he he's in Babylon with the king, right? With Nebuchadnezzar. And I'm sure I spelled that wrong, but King Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, so that was Daniel. That gives you another perspective about all the things that are being said and done there. That was in 605. Then we have the next part of this picture that we're in right now was the second siege was in 597. 597. And then that was when who went into captivity? Ezekiel and the 10,000. We see Jehoiachin, right? King Jehoiachin also, they go into captivity. So this is the first siege. This is the second siege. And this, when speaking of sieges, it's sieges of what? What's being sieged? Jerusalem specifically, but Judah on the whole, because when Jerusalem falls, all Judah falls. Okay, so first siege, second siege. Then the last one is in 586, right, BC. And this is not in perspective to anything on this. I'm just showing you it's falling in the Babylonian time frame. So 605, 578, so we have the three sieges of Judah and Jerusalem. And we have Jeremiah, who's been preaching before. We have Daniel here. And then concerning Ezekiel, when does Ezekiel begin to prophesy? Yeah, where do we start? Go back to Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 1. In the what?
The 5th year of King David.
Yeah, in the 5th year. 592. Most of them say 593 for some reason, so whichever you want to put. So 592, we've got Ezekiel 1:1 and 2. That tells us that's when he begins to prophesy, right here. So now we've got 3 prophets all speaking simultaneously. This is how it gives you an idea then of your companion prophets and how they're governed. Now, when it comes to Daniel, what are his prophecies primarily fixed towards? The kings, all basically it's a roadmap of history, right? He's giving all of this. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and he even takes all the way into the millennial kingdom with the 10 toes and so forth. So Daniel his is a big picture. Big picture. It's still of hope. It's still about Israel. It's still, because he says, in chapter 9, let me write that better so that you'll know that I mean Daniel 9. In Daniel 9, chapter 9, specifically in 24 to 27, he lays out some real specific details about when the Messiah is going to come, how he's going to be cut off and have nothing, meaning he goes to the cross and he dies and he does not yet possess his kingdom. But then later, there's going to come a time in the day of the little prince who is to come, of another prince. And in that day, speaking of this day of the tribulation, then God will begin to work his work to purge, refine, and purify who? Israel. In order to do this, put Israel on her land, and then they will be his people. And he does that by bringing them into what? Them into the new covenant. O-N-A-N-T, into the new covenant by faith. And what is it that, when this time frame is going on, when it says they will look upon him whom what? Whom they have pierced. So they're going to be putting their faith and their trust, their belief in Jesus at this point. And he says, and then they will recognize all that they had done, and they will, by faith, come into salvation, believing what Abraham believed, that God would send a seed to be the Savior of the world. They're finally going to get it all the way over here. But we're not there yet in what we're studying. Where we're studying is way back here. We haven't even got to the Medo-Persia Empire yet. So we're way back here in this time frame here, and we're really consolidated in our view. Our perspective on everything we're looking at is right here, with allusions to everything else that I'm putting on this board. You almost have to know this. You have to understand there was an Abrahamic covenant. You have to understand they were under the covenant of the law. The law does not save. Let's put that on here. Does not save. It's not a covenant of salvation. It was a covenant of obedience to make them a people who would proclaim God's glories to the world, through which people could come into this kind of a personal covenant over here. This one saves. When you get into the new covenant, we're not going to talk about it a lot, but there's a new covenant that's going to come over here. And in this time frame here, the new covenant that's in Jesus. Now, tell me what you know about the new covenant, just briefly. Okay, is it? It's okay. It's God gives us a new spirit, His Spirit. I didn't mean to say new. It's a new covenant. Gives us His Spirit. That's the promise. And we're going to see that in Ezekiel 36. That is the promise of the new covenant that they are understanding back here. That promise was made here. It was also made here. It was also made from the beginning of the world. But he also goes on to expand on this. He says, concerning the new covenant in Hebrews 11, or Hebrews 8, 9, and 10 rather, in Hebrews 8, 9, and 10, it talks about this new covenant, how it replaces the covenant of the law, because it makes the covenant of the law obsolete. But within the covenant of the law, you also have this part called Sabbaths. This is the holiness. These are the holy statutes, right? The holy worship statutes. And that makes them distinct. Are they obsolete? No, they're not. So what does he make obsolete in this according to Hebrews 8-10? The works of the law. So that's why when you get into things like Galatians and even into almost all of Paul's writing, he constantly is making a tit for tat about the law versus grace. The new covenant is a covenant of grace. It is for salvation. It's personal for the individual. And the reason I'm bringing all this up is because when he's going to put Israel back on her land, when God says to Israel in Romans 11, and all Israel shall be saved, what does he mean by that? Who is all Israel? All the ones who have come into personal here. That's why you got to read Zechariah 12-14. How is he going to go about doing that? Well, during the tribulation, he's going to purge and refine and purify that nation. 2/3 of Israel will die during that time, who are living at that time in history. The other 1/3 will get saved. In one day they will look upon him whom they have pierced, and they will confess that he is who he is. They will sorrow over the fact that they had pierced him, and they will understand that he is the one, the seed that was promised, and that he has come now. He's going to bring them into this new covenant by faith and put them back on their land. So who of Israel will be saved? Not a special people, not just because they're Jews. They still only get in by the faith that God requires of every person who is going to have a relationship with him. So salvation is only for those by faith. It is never a given just because of your national birth. However, he has a national people he's working through. Why? Because in choosing a national people, he can do profound things that catches the eyes of the world. The world can see that this is not possible under human standards and under human thinking and reasoning, only by the power of God. I kind of think about, remember when Jesus came to Nicodemus by night, and he spoke about the miracles that he was doing, and he says, except that God be with you, you could not do these things. So he had come at least to that point where he was recognizing, this is the power of God I'm seeing work in and through this man. At this point, he doesn't totally understand that he's Jesus, but then Jesus gives him the gospel message. So this is what we're seeing in the bigger picture here. The Abrahamic covenant, the covenant of the law, and then the new covenant. The first one, the Abrahamic covenant, saves if you enter it by faith, believing God. Some people in Israel did, some didn't, right? Regardless of whether they did or didn't enter by faith, he still chose the people to be a tool in his hand, that he would work. He would work his miracles, he would show himself who he is, and he would accomplish what he promised, which was to bring a seed. He narrows it down to a specific nation so that the world would see where they needed to be looking. It gave us all focus. Look at Israel, because that's, how many of you have heard sermons? Watch Israel, that's the heartbeat of God. Watch Israel, that's the movement of God. Watch Israel, that's when you're going to know what God's up to. So we can see what's going on with Israel right now, and what are we saying about it? Whew, he's coming soon, he's coming soon, right? Because we're seeing the fulfillment of so many of God's prophecies concerning what's going on. We're seeing the coalition right now, the beginning of these coalitions of kings that Daniel spoke of in his chapters. So as we're looking at Israel, God gave us that focus by choosing a nation so he could do these things through a nation that we would set our eyes upon. And we would watch God working in miraculous ways, and that would cause us to turn our hearts toward God and be in awe of him. All right, so he gave us 3 prophets. So that shows you your 3 prophets and kind of shows you their timeline. He covered 627 to 574 for 53 years. Daniel was a shorter time frame. He was 592 to 7 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 to Oop, is that right? That's Ezekiel. Daniel. I knew that was wrong. 605, thank you, to 536 BC. And so what he does is he goes, and that's a total of 33 years. He goes from the Babylonian Empire, starting in 605, all the way into the beginning of this Medo-Persian Empire time. He's there when Medo-Persia, we see this with King Darius at the end of the book of Daniel. He's there when Darius comes on the scene, and he's called out of hibernation, so to speak, and he shows those things. And then he kind of ends there. Now, if you want a really good visual of this, you have a map in your work somewhere that looks like this. And that kind of shows you, I highlighted mine with yellow at the bottom of the page just so you could kind of see how they overlap one another and how they work together. But it's really cool when you look at this in perspective to everything that we are doing right now in Ezekiel. Okay, does that help you? So those last three boxes are your three guys. So we see, I'm going to see if I can do it by color. Daniel, he's going to be blue. Daniel goes right here, and he goes all the way into here. Okay, Jeremiah, I'll do him with green. Jeremiah started at the end of the Assyrian captivity. We know he gets into captivity in 586, right? So here he is. And we're not sure exactly how far he goes into the Medo. Let me look on here. Ezekiel. Oh, he doesn't go into the Medo-Persian. He goes into somewhere in here-ish, right? But we can see how they're overlapping one another. And then we have the last one. Who have I done? I've done Daniel. I did Jeremiah with green. And now I'll do Ezekiel with red, because that's our guy. Ezekiel in red. And Ezekiel starts right here. And he goes until 559 BC. And that is that into the Babylonian? Can you tell on that map?
Yeah, it is.
559.
559.
It's right at the end, basically, of the Babylonian.
Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah, he's still under Nebuchadnezzar.
562.
559. So he's not really at the end of that. But so he's a much shorter period. He's only 33 years. So I'm going to bring him. Now, help me out. I'm not as good at this. Give me the reasoning. Work on this. Ezekiel, he's before Daniel ends, but he goes beyond Jeremiah. So, okay, so he goes out here somewhere, right? And he's only for 33 years. But the cool thing when you do it this way is it just shows you how they're overlapping one another. Yeah. And so Jeremiah starts first, then Daniel comes in, then Ezekiel comes in. And they each have a part to play, right? The final third siege is over here in 586. This is when Jeremiah is captive, and Jerusalem falls. And he comes with them. And he continues to do some of his speaking beyond the captivity time right here. Here's where he is. So he continues to prophesy just a few years beyond his captivity. So he's lived a really hard life, though. This poor guy has been in and out of cisterns, and he's been attacked and so forth. But Jeremiah is taken captive in the third siege. That's the third. I don't know if I'm spelling this right. Siege. Yeah, I before E. Right, okay. Okay.
Daniel had a longer, you said 33 years for Daniel.
Mm-hmm. His is blue.
An old man. He had the longest.
I think you meant to put 33 years for Ezekiel.
Yeah, not Daniel.
Or unless you were just talking about the prophesying.
Prophesying part.
Prophesying.
I'm not talking about his age. I'm talking about how long he prophesied. Yeah. But all I'm trying to do is give you perspective of how these men's lives overlapped one another. We know when they began their prophesying. Jeremiah began it just at the end of the Assyrian captivity as Babylon was conquering Assyria. He began to be the prophet to the southern tribes. And he goes with them basically all the way through it. Then Daniel comes in the middle of it, and he speaks from the king's palace and Nebuchadnezzar's palace in Babylon itself proper. He speaks from more of a big picture, global world powers that are to come and how God is going to bring about his kingdom in the end. So it's the raising up and the putting down of kingdoms, and one day his kingdom is going to come, which is a kingdom that will never be destroyed. And then Ezekiel comes in, and he focuses just on the people that he's ministering to there in their captivity. And the confusion was, and we all kind of had it in the beginning, was they had a confusion that the people who were in captivity were the ones who were being punished by God, that they were the ones that God was displeased with. And the people back in Jerusalem says, hey, we're in the pot, right? We're safe, we're good. And God says, oh yeah? Let me show you something. And at that point, God takes us through those several chapters, like 8, 9, 10, 11, something like that, where his glory, he takes Ezekiel by a vision. Chapter 8:1 starts that second vision. He takes him to show him the temple and how awful the people are committing abominations against God, against his temple, just the defilement that was going on there. And then in the conclusion of that, he shows or reveals to Ezekiel what is going to happen, which is the Spirit of God is going to leave the temple proper and then leave the city itself. And so they show that progression of events. So we've been through all of that. That's what we've seen so far. I think that covers everything for a good review. I think that's a pretty good. Do you have any questions? The only thing that we didn't do was go through and just recount our at a glance chart, but I really don't want to have to do all that. One of the things I did want to do was I went back and redid that parable that we did in chapter 17, the 2 eagles and a vine, because in the evening class we had the same complication that we had in the morning group with what a part of the vine was the vine that was the low-growing vine, and I kept putting it by the water because I kept associating the river Chebar as the water that was being referenced. That isn't what it was at all, okay? So when God cuts off the top of that cedar and he transports it to the river Chebar, yes, there's water there, and that's where the refugees or the exiles are taken to. But the low-growing vine is the rest of that tree that remains. It remains in Israel. It's the low-growing vine. Now, the way helped me do this is I went back and I did a parallel. Do you remember I said to you how in chapter 17 it gives you both the prophecies or the imagery at the beginning, and then it gives you interpretation? I made a chart, and I took the first half of the chapter and put all of the imagery part here. Then I layered next to it, right in the chart next to it, all the things that were being said to show the parallel. Now, we still came to the correct conclusion about, that Babylon was still going to conquer Zedekiah. King Zedekiah was going to be killed, basically. He has his eyes put out after his children are killed before him. He's carried off to Babylon to die. But Israel itself is the vine, the low-growing vine. And the idea of it being by the waters in that passage is actually, I think, talking about the living water of God at the temple. Now that I got corrected, thankfully my evening group was like going, no. Yeah, they were persistent, and they were good, and it was good. I'm so glad, because I was missing that part of the picture. But I did do a parallel on it, and that really helped me, the way I laid it out. Let me see if I've got that handy here. Yeah, I can do that, sure. Let me see if I can even find it here. Oh, that's next week's. Wrong one. I'm on the wrong side of things. Hello. This must be it right here. Okay. Ezekiel 17. Okay. I made 3 columns. The first column is the riddle and the parable. The second column is the the context, within the text, starting in verse 11, the interpretation, which God gives us. My third one, I just gave myself a place to put a whole bunch of cross-references in other, like Kings and other places that I could go to. 2 Kings and Chronicles. So once I did it, I was able to line things up, you see, and I even kind of color-coded things to show, to a land of merchants. Well, that's saying to Babylon, for instance, in this verse 4 compares to verse 12. And then he also took some of the seed of the land and planted it in fertile soil, and he placed it beside abundant waters. I kept thinking that was the river Chebar, but that wasn't it. The top of the vine is put by the river Chebar, but the rest of it remained with its roots intact. That was the remnant left still in Jerusalem that God was going to deal with. So it says he took so the interpretation on that is in verse 13. He took one of the royal family, he made a covenant with him, putting him under oath. Once I laid it out side by side like this, then you go, oh, I wish I had done this before. I do know better, and I've done this so many times, and I don't know why I didn't think to do it in my homework this time. But sometimes I forget to tell you all I'm doing these things too, because I just do them by rote. But anytime you have a chapter, Daniel was masterful in doing this, giving us the vision, and then and he actually says, and this is the interpretation. So I love that. This one, it isn't quite that clear, because he goes here, the opening of the interpretation part, he says, moreover, the word of the Lord came to me saying, say now to the rebellious house, do you not know that what these things mean? Well, it's almost like saying, and this is the interpretation. But, it isn't quite as clear. However, that it does say it. So then you're able to line things up. And every time I found something that was in common, I marked it in a way that I could see it. And then I gave myself some little dashes in between things to section out so I could make comparison with comparison as I went through it. And then at the end of that particular chapter, he goes into a future promise of the coming cedar, who is this kingdom right here, right? So I can send that out to you to show you how I did that, and that might be helpful to you. But I am thankful to my evening group for hanging on to that and just saying, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense because I see a vine here and I see a vine here. What it was really only one vine, and the only vine that they're talking about in that parable is the one that stays in Jerusalem because the top of the cedar was removed. The way I was reading it, the top of the cedar was removed, planted by fertile waters, and it became a vine. So I just kept going back to Babylon. So see there? You can make mistakes if you aren't careful. And that's why you need iron sharpening iron. We did really well, though. I think we did good. We did it under our time, I think, and we don't have time. We're not going to do video today, obviously, because we're kind of working outside our script. But any questions that you have, please text or email. Thank you to those of you who sent me lovely Christmas cards and texts. And I sent texts out to everybody, I think, most everybody that I could find on my phone on Christmas Day to say Merry Christmas and so forth. But this year will be the best yet. I pray you are taking to heart that God has really given you a gift with this curriculum. This is the best curriculum out on the market, even to this very day, that brings it down. It takes seminary work and brings it down to, it's still a challenge, but it's doable. And it all depends on how much time you're willing to put in on it. You'll get out of it whatever you put in. But I also know this, if you don't even get your homework done, you just show up to class, you're going to learn more in our class discussion than you would learn in most Bible studies because we go so in depth. And I do hear that from all of you quite regularly, how in depth the class is and how that really is meaningful to you, because so many of us sit through sermon after sermon in our churches and we're lost. Pastors say stuff in passing because they've got all this in their mind, right? And more. Much more than I do, but it is a real blessing. And I just want to say, lift up a prayer of thanksgiving to God this week for the ministry work of Precept, what they've done for us, and how God worked through Kay Arthur and all her staff to bring this curriculum to us. And then also thank God that He's given you a heart to want to do this, because I have to commend all of you. You are the cream of the crop. You are the ones that are really persevering. I would love to see us bring more people in. I don't know where the people are, but Jesus told us it was going to get sparse at the end time, and I can see it. Here we are. We're at the end. There are some mega churches still out there, but they're not in the Bible study classes like this. So thank you for all of your faithfulness, you guys. Thank you for your blessings to me. Thank you for all your kind words. I can't say thank you enough. You guys have been awesome. So next week, Lesson 6, Part B, starting on day 3 through 5. You're going to do those last 2 chapters for that lesson, and we will see you next week. Yes?